She was screaming, not the kind of scream that comes from stubbing your toe or burning your hand on a hot stove. This was the kind of scream that tears itself out from somewhere deep inside a person, the kind that sounds like a soul being separated from a body, and nobody in the town of Redwall Creek was doing a single thing about it. The wagon rope was rough and thick, knotted twice around her wrists, and it trailed back to the hitch of a coal-black horse ridden by a man named Denton Hale. He moved the horse at a slow, deliberate trot, not fast enough to kill her, just fast enough to humiliate her, just fast enough to drag her through the dirt of Main Street, while the dust rose up in clouds around her body, and her dress tore at the knees, and her voice gave out, until all that was left was a hollow, broken gasping. Her name was Clara Vesper. She was 26 years old. She had done nothing wrong, and every single person on that street, the shopkeepers standing in their doorways, the women clutching their aprons, the old men on the bench outside the barber shop, every one of them watched. Some looked away. Most did not. A few, God help them, almost smiled. That was the town of Redwall Creek in the summer of 1887, and that was the kind of man Denton Hale was. Clara had come to Redwall Creek 8 months earlier, arriving on the afternoon stage with nothing but a leather traveling case and a letter of employment from the schoolhouse board. She was a teacher, a good one. She had graduated top of her class from the Women's College in Abilene, and she had references from 2 counties over, all of which said the same thing, that Miss Clara Vesper had a gift for reaching the children that other teachers couldn't reach, the ones who sat in the back, the ones who came to school with bruises on their arms, the ones who had already decided, at age 9 or 10, that the world did not have a place for them. She had a gift for those children because she had once been one of them, but none of that mattered now, as the rope cut into her wrists and the gravel of Main Street opened up the skin on her palms and her knees, and Denton Hale rode slow and proud at the front, tipping his hat to people as he passed like he was leading a parade. It had started overland. It almost always did. Out here, Denton Hale owned most of Redwall Creek. Not just land businesses, debts, and people. His family had settled the county 30 years before, and had spent every one of those years accumulating what they could not earn through hard work by other means. He had a deed to the schoolhouse property and a new deed to a stretch of land that sat right behind the cemetery, a parcel of 40 acres that had been, until 3 weeks ago, a small farm belonging to a widow named Ruth Calloway. Ruth Calloway was Clara's friend, her only real friend in Redwall Creek. When Denton's men had come to put Ruth off her land she'd worked alone for 11 years since her husband died of fever, Clara had been there. She had seen the documents. She had read them carefully, the way a teacher reads things, slowly and without flinching. And she had noticed something. The second deed, the one that transferred Ruth's 40 acres to Denton Hale, bore a date of signing that was 3 days after Ruth's husband had died. But according to the county clerk's record, which Clara had quietly obtained on a trip to the next town, the original deed of ownership had been registered in Ruth's name alone, following her husband's passing. The transfer couldn't be legal. The signature on the second document was Ruth's husband's name, a dead man's name. Clara had written it all down. She had prepared a proper letter for the territorial court. She had told Ruth to hold on, that this was not over, that the law, the real law, not Denton Hale's version of it, would hear their case. Denton had found out within 2 days. He had spies in every corner of that town. He had come to Clara's boarding house on a Tuesday morning, 3 men behind him, and he had told her very calmly and very quietly that if she sent that letter, she would regret it. He had that way of speaking, that powerful, dangerous men sometimes have completely without emotion, like he was reading from a list, like hurting people was just an item to be checked off before lunch. Clara had looked him in the eye and said she was sending the letter. She sent it that afternoon. On Wednesday morning, Denton Hale rode up to the schoolhouse while she was writing the day's lessons on the board, her back to the door. She heard the boots on the wooden floor behind her. She heard the children go silent. She turned around. "Pack your things," he said. "I have a class," she said. "Not anymore." And then his men had come in behind him, and in front of 30 children between the ages of 6 and 14, they had bound her wrists with a wagon rope and dragged her out into the street. That was the moment the screaming started. They went the long way down Main Street, and Denton chose the route deliberately past the general store, past the church, past the post office, where the postmaster stood in the door watching with wide, helpless eyes, past the saloon, where 3 men stepped onto the porch, drinks in hand, and stared in silence, past the widow Ruth Calloway's old boarding house, where Ruth herself stood in an upstairs window, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears running down her face. Clara's scream faded. Her voice was gone. She stopped fighting the rope because fighting only made the burning worse, and somewhere in the terrible clarity of that moment, she realized that fighting was not going to save her. Something else was going to have to save her. Or no one was. That was when she heard the sound. It was a voice, deep as the bottom of a well. Not loud. Exactly. It did not need to be loud, because it had the kind of weight that carried itself through the air and settled in your chest before you even understood what was being said. "Stop the horse." Denton Hale did not stop the horse. He looked back over his shoulder in the direction of the voice, and his eyes found the source of it. And something happened in his face. Something that Denton Hale's face was not accustomed to doing. Something flickered behind his eyes that in a lesser man you might have called doubt. The man standing in the street behind them was enormous. Not in the exaggerated way of stories, not like something out of a tall tale, but in the way of a man who had spent his entire life doing hard physical work in hard physical country, and had been built by it over decades into something that seemed to belong more to the Bloss landscape than to ordinary human society. He was well over 6 feet. His shoulders were broad, in a way that made the width of the street seem suddenly insufficient. He wore a long canvas duster, trail-worn and sun-bleached, and a hat that had seen 10 years of weather without complaint. His hands, hanging loose at his sides, were the size of small shovels. He had a knife on his belt. He had not reached for it. He was simply standing there, and the sheer fact of him standing there was doing something to the air. His name was Elias Cord, and nobody in Redwall Creek had seen him before that morning, because Elias Cord had ridden in overnight and taken a room at the far end of town, and had not told a single soul who he was or what he was doing there. I said, "Stop the horse," he said again. Denton Hale looked at him for a long moment. Then he pulled the reins. The horse stopped. The rope went slack. Clara sagged forward onto her hands, gasping. "Move on, stranger," Denton said. He said it in his flat, cold way. "This is a private matter." "Doesn't look private," Elias said. He began walking forward, slowly, like a man who had all the time in the world and was not concerned about what was between him and where he was going. "Looks like a woman being dragged through a public street in front of every person in your town. She broke the law." "Which law is that?" A long pause. Denton's jaw tightened. "My law." Elias Cord stopped walking when he was about 15 feet from the horse. He looked at Clara on the ground. He looked at her wrists, raw, bleeding, shaking. He looked at her face, dirt-streaked, tears dried to salt tracks on her cheeks, eyes that still held something burning in them, something that had not gone out. Then he reached down to his belt, and he pulled the knife. It was a large knife. A working knife, the kind a man carries for practical reasons and not for show. The blade caught the sun for just a second as he stepped forward past the horse, and before anyone on that street could speak or move, he crouched down beside Clara Vesper and cut the rope. One clean stroke, The fibers parted. The rope fell away. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Clara had ever heard. Denton Hale's voice, when it came, was no longer flat. There was something underneath it now, something that wanted to sound like fury, but was thinly layered over something else. "You have no idea what you just did." "I cut a rope," Elias said. He was still crouching beside Clara. He had not looked back up at Denton yet. He was looking at her wrists, assessing the damage, with the quiet, practiced attention of a man who had dealt with injuries before. "Can you stand?" he said to her. His voice was different when he spoke to her. Still low, but without the weight of the confrontation in it. Calm, steady, like a hand placed gently on the back of someone who is about to fall. "Yes," Clara said. It came out as barely a whisper. He helped her up. His hand under her arm was like being lifted by a piece of the earth itself. Not rough, exactly, but solid, in a way that made the ground feel more trustworthy beneath her feet. "You'll hang for this," Denton said. And now there were his 3 men moving off the horses, and there were 2 more men stepping off the saloon porch, and the odds in the street had shifted in a direction that seemed to make what Elias Cord had done not just dangerous, but fatal. Elias turned around then. He faced Denton Hale and his men, and he did something that nobody on that street expected. He smiled. Not a pleasant smile. Not a reassuring smile. The kind of smile a man wears when he has been waiting for something for a very long time and it has finally arrived. "My name is Elias Cord," he said. "I am a deputy marshal of the Territorial Court of the 2nd District." He reached into his duster with his left hand. His right still held the knife, loose and easy at his side, and produced a badge. Silver. It caught the sun the same way the knife had. He let them look at it. "I have in my saddlebag a warrant for the arrest of Denton Hale on charges including fraud, coercion, falsification of land transfer documents, and the unlawful seizure of property belonging to one Ruth Calloway of Redwall Creek County." He paused. "I also have, as of about 2 minutes ago, witnessed evidence of unlawful restraint and public assault, which I am adding to the list." The street was absolutely still. Then Denton Hale laughed. It was not a real laugh. It was the sound a man makes when he has decided to stop pretending to be civilized. "You came alone," he said. "One man, with a badge and a knife." He gestured at the men around him. "Count, Marshal." "I can count," Elias said. "Then you know how this ends." "I know how you think it ends," Elias said. "But here's the thing about men like you, Hale. You've been the biggest fish in this pond for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like when something bigger swims in." He tilted his head slightly. "Now, are you going to come along quietly, or are you going to make this the worst decision of your life in front of all these people who've been afraid of you for years?" Denton Hale's hand moved toward the pistol at his hip. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Elias Cord moved the way that very large men sometimes move when they have spent years training the size of their body into a tool, not lumbering, not slow, but with an explosive, directed force that most people never expect from someone that big. He crossed the 15 feet between himself and Denton's horse before Denton's pistol had cleared the holster, and the knife went not into Denton, but flat against his wrist, the handle, not the blade, a precise and brutal impact on the nerve bundle there, and the pistol dropped into the dirt, and Denton Hale let out a sound that was mostly surprise and partly the beginning of a scream. Then Elias had him off the horse. One hand, collar of the jacket, pulled down and backward, and Denton Hale landed on his back in the main street dust with the force of a man who had never in his life been put on the ground before. The other men froze. Elias stood over Denton and looked at the men and said one word. "No." Just that. Just no. And it was enough. Clara stood in the street and watched it all, and felt something happening in her chest that she could not immediately name. It was not just relief. Relief was too small a word for it. It was something closer to the feeling of a door being opened in a room where you had been locked for so long that you had stopped being able to imagine what was on the other side. It took another hour for the rest of it to play out. Elias had, as he said, come alone, but he had also sent word ahead of his arrival 2 days prior to the sheriff in the next county, and by mid-afternoon, 3 more riders came into Redwall Creek with additional warrants and the authority of the territorial court behind them. Denton Hale was placed in chains, his men scattered. 2 were caught, 1 was not. But he never came back to Redwall Creek. Ruth Calloway came down from her boarding house window. She stood in the street and looked at Clara, and Clara looked at her, and then they held each other for a long time without saying anything at all. Some things are too big for words. They can only be held. That evening, with Denton Hale in custody and the warrants served, and the town in a suspended state, like a person who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has just been told they can exhale, Clara sat on the steps of the schoolhouse with a cloth wrapped around her wrists and a cup of coffee that one of the shopkeeper's wives had brought her, and Elias Cord sat on the step below her. She asked him how he had known to come. She meant it as a simple question, but it turned out to be not simple at all. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he had received her letter, the one she had sent to the territorial court about Ruth Calloway's land. She stared at him. I sent that to the land registrar's office. You did, he said. But land fraud in this district gets flagged and forwarded. Has for about 2 years now, since the court started taking it seriously. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. I've been working Hale's case for 4 months. Your letter was the evidence we needed. The document you described, the dead man's signature on the transfer deed, that was the piece we didn't have. So you were already coming. I was already coming, but I wasn't supposed to arrive until today. He paused. I got here yesterday evening. Heard talk in the saloon about what Hale was planning for the morning. His jaw tightened briefly, almost imperceptibly. I considered moving last night, but I needed the warrants to be clean. I needed to do it by the book. He looked down at his hands. I almost didn't wait. Clara looked at him for a long moment. But you did. I did. And then, he did it anyway. In the street. In front of everyone. Yes, he said quietly. And then, you cut the rope. He looked up at her. In the fading light, his face was harder to read than it had been in the street. Not cold, exactly, but carrying something. A weight of some kind. The kind that comes from seeing too much of the worst that people do to each other and choosing, day after day, to stand in between. I cut the rope, he agreed. What she said next surprised her, even as she said it. I wasn't going to stop, she said. Even after this. Even with my wrists like this. She looked down at the cloth wrapping. I was going to send another letter. I was going to keep going until someone listened. I know, he said. How do you know that? Because you sent the first one after he threatened you, he said. A person who was going to stop wouldn't have done that. She was quiet for a while. The sun was almost gone, and the town was settling into the bruised, uncertain piece of a place that has just had something broken in it. Not a bad break, but a break nonetheless. The kind of break that has to happen before something can heal properly, like a bone reset, painful, necessary. What happens now? She asked. Not just about the court case, about all of it. The case goes to trial, he said. The land goes back to Mrs. Calloway if the judge rules the way I expect. Hale and his men face charges. He paused. It'll take time. These things always do. And the town? He considered that. Towns are complicated, he said. A lot of those people watched today and didn't do anything. Some of them are decent people who were just afraid. Some of them aren't decent. You'll have to figure out, over time, which is which. And the children? She said. My students, they were in the classroom. They saw him come in. They saw me taken out. Her voice caught slightly on the last few words. What does something like that do to a child? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was carefully. I think, he said, that they also saw a woman who didn't beg, who held her head up even when she was being dragged through the dirt. He paused. And I think they saw someone cut the rope. She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead, at the street, at the darkening town, and his profile against the last of the light was like something carved. Will you stay? She asked. Until the trial. I'll stay as long as the case needs me. That's not what I asked. He turned and looked at her then. Really looked at her in the way that people sometimes do when they have been careful not to for a while. And for a moment, the weight he carried eased slightly, and what was underneath it was something quieter and more human. No, he said, it isn't. Over the weeks that followed, Redwall Creek changed. Slowly, unevenly, with reversals and complications, the way all real change happens, not like a light switched on, but like a season turning, so gradual you sometimes couldn't tell it was happening, until one day you looked up and everything was different. The school reopened. Clara returned to her classroom and found, on her first morning back, that every one of her 30 students was in their seat. No absences, no missing children whose parents had decided to keep them home out of misplaced loyalty to the old order. Every child present, sitting straight, watching her with the careful, evaluating attention that children give to people who have proven themselves. She stood at the front of the room and looked at them for a long moment. Then, she picked up the chalk and turned to the board. Let's continue where we left off, she said. Ruth Calloway got her land back. The territorial court ruled in October, 2 weeks before the first frost. The judge was a sharp-eyed woman from the capital who read every document Clara had compiled and spent exactly 4 minutes deliberating before declaring the transfer deed fraudulent and void. Ruth Calloway wept in the courtroom. Clara sat beside her and held her hand. Denton Hale was sentenced to 8 years in the territorial prison. He stood in the dock and looked at Clara as the sentence was read, and she looked back at him, and she did not look away first. Elias Cord testified on the 3rd day of the trial. He was precise and factual on the stand, the way marshals are trained to be, giving evidence without embellishment, building the case brick by careful brick. Clara sat in the gallery and watched him, and thought about the rope cut in one clean stroke, the badge in the sunlight, the one word spoken to a row of armed men that had been enough. After the trial, she found him outside the courthouse, on the steps, his duster on, his horse hitched at the post. She understood, looking at him, that this was a man whose life was motion county to county, case to case, warrant to warrant. She understood that he had a road in him that she could not ask him to leave. But she walked up to him anyway. Thank you, she said. It was not enough. It was the only word that existed for what she meant. He looked at her for a long moment. You wrote the letter, he said. You found the evidence. You stood your ground when a man like Denton Hale told you not to. He paused. I cut a rope. You did the rest. She shook her head slowly. You gave me the chance to keep going. He held her gaze. Then he reached into his coat and produced a small, folded piece of paper. I'll be in this district through the spring, he said. There's a postal address for the court. He paused, and something in the careful distance of his expression softened for just a moment. I read every letter that gets sent there. She took the paper. She unfolded it. She looked at the address, then looked up at him. Then I'll write, she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he nodded, put on his hat, and walked down the courthouse steps to his horse. She watched him mount. She watched him turn the horse and ride out to the edge of town, and then out past the edge onto the long road south, and then he was a shape in the distance, and then he was gone. She stood there for a while after he disappeared from sight. The autumn wind moved through the cottonwood trees along the street, and the leaves came down in slow golden spirals, and the sky above Redwall Creek was the particular shade of blue that only happens in late October, deep and clear and endless. The color of something beginning. Clara Vesper folded the paper carefully and put it in her coat pocket, close to her heart. Then she turned and walked back toward the schoolhouse, where 30 children were waiting. Her wrists had healed. The scars would stay thin white lines at the creases where the rope had bitten deepest, but she had stopped trying to cover them with her sleeves. When her students asked about them, she told the truth. She told them that sometimes the world tries to stop you from doing what is right, and that the scars from that fight are not something to be ashamed of. They are proof that you were in the fight, proof that you did not surrender. On the first day of November, the postmaster brought her a letter. It had the return address of the Territorial Court, 2nd District, written in a hand that was careful and deliberate and slightly larger than necessary, the handwriting of a man who does not write often, but writes with intention when he does. She sat at her desk after the children had gone home for the day, and she opened it in the quiet schoolroom, with the afternoon light coming through the windows at a low angle, turning the wooden floors gold. She read it once. She read it again. Then she took out a fresh piece of paper, dipped her pen, and began to write back. Outside, the wind moved through the trees of Redwall Creek, and the last of the leaves came down, and the town settled into the long, quiet work of becoming something better than it had been. It would not be perfect. It would not be fast. There would be men in that town who resented what had happened, who would carry their bitterness into the years ahead and let it curdle into something ugly. There would be hard days and setbacks and moments when the weight of it all pressed down on Clara Vesper's chest in the dark hours of the morning. But there would also be this: 30 children who had seen a woman refuse to be broken, who had seen that one person standing firm could be the thing that changes everything, who would carry that knowledge with them for the rest of their lives, and who would pass it on, in ways large and small, to the people who came after them. The rope had been cut, the line was gone, and what lay ahead of her was open ground.